Hello and welcome to the 12th episode of Dice and Design. And today I'm joined as usual with Tyler, but we also have like a special guest this week with Crispy from the channel Table Runner. You're gonna have like both of their channel in the description down below. And today we have like a very interesting topic, I believe. It's how to get and how to keep active player at your table. Tyler, welcome. Crispy, welcome. Thank you for joining us, guys.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I think this is a great topic.
I'm very glad that you can join us, Crispy, because like I've seen you play. I've seen you, and now I haven't like played with you last night on a 28mm RPG channel. If you want to see that, and I've seen you in Big Bad's RPG game, and you are a very active player, like a great role player, like a dream for a GM. I would say
a dream or a nightmare, depending on what kind of game that you want.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
I guess that's fair, yeah, because like some GM might not want those active player.
Well, I think you're right, Max. If you're used to just kind of dictating to the players what they should be doing at all times, you're gonna have trouble with me, and I'm gonna have trouble with you, because it's just one of those things like where and you may have actually been in games like that. Have you guys been in games where you just felt like, when am I just supposed to guess what's in the GM's head? Is that what this game is? Like, am I just supposed to sit by and heaven forbid, they just tell me a story?
Yeah.
And I'm just not interested with that at all. So.
Yeah. And it feels like, everything you try to do, the GM like comes up with, oh, you can't do that because there's an obstacle here. And it's like, well, you didn't describe that when you were describing the room. And it's like, are you just making up reasons on the fly that I can't, go do?
Yeah, I feel like some GM come up. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just feel like when Tyler was talking, when you were saying that, I was thinking, so is this a game where I just run into invisible walls until I finally get to the right one?
And it feels like you'll see this a lot with GMs that talk about railroading as if railroading's not an issue, and it's like no, you just need to give the illusion of choice. And it's like, okay, well, with an active player, that illusion breaks down real quickly, right? Because you can go to that mountain over there, a la Skyrim, and it's like, well, eventually you run into that invisible wall and see, oh, you can't go this way. It's like, oh, well, I can't then.
Before we go on, why don't we just define what we mean exactly by active player, right? For me, when I say like we want active player, I want players that's not just gonna be the audience, not just gonna be there like to be told the story, but are gonna be like co-creator of the narrative that we develop together. That they're gonna propose things, they're gonna move with the character, they're gonna add to the scene, and they're gonna keep the narrative moving, and they're not afraid to contribute something to the scene, to what's happening. That's what I would call, in short, an active player. Did I miss something, you think, guys? Would you add something else?
I am certainly, I think that's to contextualize our conversation around that as a definition of active. I think that works really well. We may even be able to distill it down even a little more than that and say, well, an active player is not one that's waiting for the game master to say, what do you do? Right? They're excited to interact without being prompted to interact.
And with that, an active player is sort of one that controls the pace of things, whereas oftentimes it can feel, if you have passive players, you can feel like as a GM, it's your job to totally control the pacing. Oh, this is going too slow, I need to come up with a reason to move them out of the scene because they're not moving out of the scene. Whereas an active player goes, we've been talking to this NPC for 10-15 minutes now, we need to get out of here. We need to move things on.
Yeah, at some point, like when there's no more juice to get out of that scene, it's good to be able, because I'm not afraid to keep the scene going. If there's still stuff happening, there's still a conversation, there's still a plan being made. When it devolves into like little chit chat until meaningless stuff, then it's time to move on. It's time to know, like, oh, okay, let's close that up, and let's move on to the next interesting part of the story.
Us Southerners are guilty of that too. That's, I think, something regionally to be aware of. You may be familiar with the Midwest goodbye, where you've said goodbye.
Oh yeah, we do that too.
30 minutes more, an hour, and You can accidentally roleplay the Midwest goodbye sometimes.
Yeah, you can.
Lord, we've been talking to the same dude for 45 minutes and nothing's happened.
And that's a good thing to learn from, especially from old movie, I guess, when people still know what to write. But like the writing being like short and to the point. You know, like they always say, like people don't say like don't do the chit chat on telephone. They hang up. Yeah, what do you want? Okay, bye. Chuck.
Exactly.
And I think that's a good standard to aim for in role playing. Like knowing to, and it's not easy, but it's a good standard to aim for.
It is. Yeah. No, I think that's. I mean, what other attributes would we say is like an active player versus a passive player? Well, the passive player just wants to follow someone else all the time. Yes. Instead of being kind of aware of having their own motivations, their own goals, and moving themselves as their own entity in the game, instead of just, hey, I guess I'll just do whatever everyone else is doing, right? Yeah.
This is a good thing to clarify. There's that language thing you guys were talking about. Scene DM as a director, which implies a script. Not necessarily.
I'd have a hard time. Yeah, I'd have a hard time if I was playing in a game and I felt like there was a script I was supposed to follow, and I'm just ornery enough that I'd be like, I bet he doesn't have this in his script, and so I'll, as an active player myself, like, no, I'd rather go some other direction than.
Scene more refers to pacing, like
scene. It's like a location, it's a time. It's a location and a time, and at some point you can move to, like, something happen in the scene, then the scene conclude, you can move to the next thing. But the scene is not pre-written. You recreate it on the get-go. And that's why also it's hard to cut all the meaningless chat, because we do that a lot in real life.
Well, sure we do.
And when you write, like when you write,
no, just kidding.
It's just like that's all we do. We need to stretch it out, guys. We still have like an hour 23 to go.
That's right.
But when you write, and I studied in school like script writing, right? And I did that some of that as a living. I was reviewing script when I was younger, till I got sick of tired of people like not accepting. Anyway, that's a different story for a different time. But when you write, you rewrite things a lot, right? And we always say you want to cut all the fat and go to the essential, because you want to make the pacing works and stuff like that. And that's something that usually your first draft is always going to be much more wordy, and then you come back and you say, okay, I can combine those two sentences, I can cut this one, those two scenes can go together. That's something you do to have a good pacing in role-playing game, because it's not scripted. We don't have this luxury, so we have to learn to do it on the fly. We have to learn to be economical with our word, and I'm certainly not good at that. But I think it's a good skill to work on.
Well, you are doing it in your second language, so I mean, we can cut you some slack on that for sure, Max. But I think you're right. It's the idea that as a player, and what I'm trying to encourage my players to do is to have a bigger role in the game in directing where things go, instead of passively waiting for things to always be acting on them. I want them to act on the world in not the sense of thespians. No, in terms of their actions. I want them to influence the world instead of just being weighted to be influenced by the world.
Yeah, exactly. You want the protagonist to basically to be proactive.
Yeah, exactly. Lead.
Yeah. They're the one, like what we're doing at the table. We're telling the story of those characters, and the player control those characters, so they have a big part of it. Somebody earlier in chat was saying, "Oh, we want reactive player." I wouldn't say you want active player, proactive player, and a reactive DM. That's personally my favorite way of DMing. Like I want you lead where the story goes, and I'll react to it.
Last night we were actually talking about the issue of having reactive GM and reactive players. Is that what's ended up happening over a long period of time is that we've ended up creating a railroad of our own design, sort of, by having where it's like, okay, a thing happens and it's like, well, we all just ended up playing characters that are reactive by nature. They want to defend themselves. They're going after this worldly problems because they're affecting them, not because they seek any personal glory, not because, you know, they have real strong motivational goals to go and do something, but because, oh, well, if I don't do that, I die, so I better go and do that, I guess. And it's like, all right, well, what's the next problem? Well, okay, let's go and fix the next problem. And so it's, we have choices, but because our characters are not as motivated as they should be, and it can feel like there are long stretches of like nothing happening, so where it's like, you know, so are we going to go to the next area? What's going on? You know, or I don't know. That seems kind of dangerous. Let's not, you know, maybe let's not go there. And we spend a lot more time planning routes than actually just doing stuff.
I guess for me, around my table, one of the key things I'm looking for in players is the player enthusiastic about what we're doing? Like, I'm quite prepared to work with players to improve their experience of the game, and so they're getting more out of it. But if they're coming there just as something to kill time, I'm not interested in that. It's not. It's more than just a social club. We're there to play the game. We're there, and I want them to be enthusiastic about the game. So if they're enthusiastic about the game, then I can work with that. That's great. But have you ever been in a game where there's someone there that they're just more interested in whatever's on their phone? Like I'm just not, I can't handle that. I can't handle it at all. Like if that for me is a deal breaker. You can't be at my table if you're just more interested in what's on your social media, or you're just constantly distracted.
And when I've had players like that, I found it interesting because it's often on and off. I don't know if it's an ADHD thing or what, but you know, like sometimes they'll be on their phone and then like certain parts of the game, I guess, will stand out in them, and then they'll all of a sudden just pop into character and do really great stuff, and then the next 10 minutes they're on their phone doing something, and it's like, so you are here for, how do I isolate for that? I just want, you know, well, I just want that one part. And sometimes I've had players in the past where they do just want to be there as an audience member effectively. And I find if you've got maybe 1 out of 5 of your players is like that, that can be okay. As long as they know the mechanics of the game and they're not, you know, slowing things down, that's fine. You can have somebody playing an extra if you like, you know, that's okay if they're not in hit. But when it starts to become 2, 3, most of your players are like that, it can feel like one of the player characters is like dragging this, you know.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Tyler. I guess I disagree a little bit in the sense that there's such limited real estate at my table. If you're just taking up space, I'm sorry.
That's also fair.
I've got other people that would like to play. I'd like to introduce the hobby to other people. If you're, you know, we can still be friends, of course, but if it's not something that that you're really interested in. But when we're talking about how to have active players, I do think that there's a whole lot that we as the ones running the game, if we're gonna like, we probably should back up and take a run at this topic from that. What can I as a game master do if I'm running the game? I do think that if I have a bunch of players that have checked out and they're just passive, then there's probably, as much as it's their responsibility to come wanting to be there and being enthusiastic, I have to be enthusiastic if I want players to be enthusiastic. So if I'm going, there's probably some way that we can differentiate between a passive game master, someone that's just there, you know, they haven't prepared well enough, they're not ready on time, you know, I'm sorry, I'm just not, you know, when the game starts, I want to be ready to start. Like, I'm ready to go, and I start on time. So if you're not there on time, I'm sorry, I'm still starting. Like, this is, I feel like if as the person that's hosting the game and running the game, if I up my game, like what I'm willing to do, to the highest standard that I can possibly maintain, and then constantly be pushing myself to do more as an active game master. So in other words, I want to model everything that I want to see in a player. I want to model myself so that they understand, okay, well, I'm not passive. I'm not just reading a paragraph from a book. That to me is more of a passive approach to running the game. And I'm not asking players to do that. I don't want to do that myself. So there's probably some things that we can, like, what do you guys do to
That's something that I want to talk about, like, because I believe that a lot of the GM actually, consciously or not, train their player to be passive, I guess. Like,
100%.
And again, this is a style thing. There's some GM out there that don't believe in player agency, that do want to tell a story, that have a plan of like the start, the middle, and the end. You might take
it's just a different type of game. Yep,
it's a different type of game. But here on this channel, we promote a specific type of gaming, which is more improvisational. Like, it's more like rolling with the punch. It's more like we create like an emergent narrative that we create together at the table, with the player being co-creator.
Yes.
That being said, I think like some GM, and there's a lot of way that, and we can all be guilty of that sometime, train your player to be passive. It's when your player try to bring something to the table as an idea, and you correct them, and you stop them, and you say, no, actually, you can do that because of X, And sometimes like they're meaningless reason. It doesn't matter. Like, the player had an idea. Maybe, there's like you're in a study and you want to flip a bookcase to block the door. And you say, well, there's no bookcase. Well, what does it matter? Maybe there is one. The player wanted to interact with a bookcase. Now there's bookcase. Like, the player like made it, like, it emerged in existence.
Or, you do the, oh, hang on, I don't know how heavy that bookcase is. Let me see. What's your strength?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Let's see. And you've just totally taken the punch out of what's supposed to be a fast, snappy scene by, going, I don't know, maybe you can do that, rather than.
That's true.
So I think part of what you can do is going, okay, I in your crunchier systems, especially, going, I don't need to know exactly, you have 18 strength that gives you a 250-pound medium. No, I know you're way stronger than an average human being. Yeah, you can tip over a bookcase, no problem. That's you sort of simplify things on the fly for when it's not going to totally break things, right?
Yeah.
There has to be.
You can ask for a role as well,
Absolutely. If there's a chance of failure, that'll be interesting. Let's get a roll on that. And I do think it's
time crunch.
I haven't done a whole lot of old school gaming. I've played quite a bit of DCC, Weird Frontiers, MCC. But what I like about those systems is that they emphasize the judge, referee, game master has to make rulings on the fly. And I think that's good in the sense that, let's just use some common sense and let's get it going. The idea that we can get I was going to say this, because the old game master in me is like, well, players they could take advantage of this. And that's true. They could. If you have a player that's going to try to, I think that comes down to an understanding that, we share, that we're not trying to break each other. Like, I'm not trying to break them. They're not trying to break the game on me. If you want to just try to break the game, then there's lots of other games that we could play. But this is much more collaborative. And since it is collaborative, I think there has to be, I would prefer to have players that are a little more mature than just all of a sudden they're going to invent that. And by the way, I had this. I'll look in the corner and there's the exact thing that I need all the time. Like, no, obviously, that's going to be. It's going to break.
There's a line, I think, between the 10 years ago or so we were hearing about the rule of cool, but you need to temper rule of cool with logic, right? If you just have full,
nonsensical is not cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's you can't just apparate things into
like
your
this,
hand.
so random, like
and
that's not what we're trying to do here, right?
There is like a note of balance here where you can push this in one of two directions, right? Where it would be cool if I just found, a suit of power armor or a suit of full plate, immediately in the first scene of, the first session that we met, cool, awesome. I find that. But look at games that do that, like Fallout 4, and it takes all of the punch out of getting this cool item because you weren't it wasn't rewarded. You just made it up on the spot.
Yeah.
On the flip side, though, you can run into situations where the GM never rewards players with these cool things for going off the beaten path. that doesn't mean you should always necessarily, every time you go off and do something creative of your own accord, it should be always good, but it should at least be interesting for
But that's the thing, like what Crispy said there, like like the word like collaborative, like we need to all be on the same page of what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to we're trying to create this narrative, and that's the goal of the game. We're all working together for them. Yeah, the GM is gonna provide opposition and challenge for the players, but at the end of the day, we're not there to win against the GM, right? We're not there to crush the PC either. Some people play in that way, but that's a very different type of game, and that's why sometimes I talk about, like we talk about the hobby, but we look at the hobby in such a different way. It's almost for a different hobby, and something I've been talking about recently.
Yeah,
that's true. There is a point, a tipping point of some kind where we hit that where, okay, well, we're doing something much different.
It's very factionalized. Yeah,
it is. But as it pertains to active players, though, I think this is a good component, which we're talking about, is what could I do to encourage it at the table? And one thing that I think would be very discouraging, if let's say I start off a session, I like to start off sessions where I tell my players right up front, here's the things that I'm working on. Like I want to do this thing better, or you may hear me say this time. I'm trying. This is what I'm improving on, and that's an implicit invitation for them to think about, well, what do I want to do better? Like I don't actually ask them, because I feel that's a little weird. If I were to say to the player, okay, Tyler, you're one of my players, say, and then Max, you're in my game, and I say, okay, Max, what are you going to do this session? Like, I don't actually go that far. What I prefer to do is to just share with with my players what I'm working on. Gentlemen, here's what I'm working on. I want to do this better, and I'm asking you to help me do this better. And they're more than willing to help out. So if you catch me doing this, please just let me know, because I'm trying to be better in this one thing. But if I do that, and then a player does something that I'm paying attention to, and I can see they're trying to be more active, and I immediately shut it down. So, and there's lots of ways I could shut it down. Oh no, it just doesn't work. Oh no, actually, any of that kind of, no, actually, it's not. Yeah. Okay. First of all, is this going to be something that is the player trying to cheat? Is the player trying to cheat by being active? In which case, well, I'll just have the world punish them through other things that'll happen. But most of the time, my players aren't like that. Again, my particular group, the problem with these kind of conversations, obviously, is that everyone's group's a little different, and the group dynamic is important. With my group, so I can only talk about what I've tried. Please understand that. Like I can't. When I say something, it's not to be prescriptive to everyone, because I have to do this for what my particular group is. Now, my group is adults. I play with adults, and mature adults usually. So I'm not as worried about it's not impossible to have a Monty Hall type experience with adults, of course, but my particular group, we're not so concerned about that. It's not been an issue, but I could still, you see what I'm getting at? If you had something where the player's coming out of their shell a little bit, and they're trying something new, and you can tell, oh, I haven't heard him do something like this before, then I want to riff on that. The last thing I want to do is, okay, quickly, well, we're just gonna close this off. Something else comes in, or roll initiative just all of a sudden, or that doesn't work, or you thought you knew that, but you thought that was someone that you knew, but no, it's not anyone you knew,
or even worse, you have those like pointless random encounters where and books will encourage this, if you don't know what to do and you don't know what's going on, just roll a random encounter. And so it becomes, every time your players try something creative, it becomes a health tax. It becomes like, oh shit, well, we better not do that. We better just go in a straight line to the goal, because every time we meander left or right, instead of being rewarded, we get stabbed or
well, yeah. So it's the idea, like this what we're talking about is, we're talking about me holding onto the reins too tightly. Like, so I'm not letting players be active, because I don't really want their input. I just want them to stay on course. And as we mentioned right at the beginning, that's really not going to encourage players to be enthusiastic and participatory in the game. Like I want you to participate in this. I want this to be something that you feel you have an influence on, not just you're being led by the nose through this. Mm-hmm. So I can do that as a game master by letting things go a little bit. Like, you know what? Maybe this is something I didn't envision that in the scene, but because the players come up with something, okay, let's go with it.
Yeah, and if it makes, it's not like some people will compare this to the Quantum Ogre of like, oh, if you didn't have it prepared, it's not in the world, but not really, because the Quantum Ogre is something that is completely nonsensical when you think about it. The thing is in two places at once, and it creates illusion of choice. Whereas this is more, oh, the character is looking in a supply closet and he's going to look for a broom so he can sharpen off the broom handle and turn it into a spear or whatever. I didn't think about that. I didn't say, there's a broom in the supply closet. Maybe I didn't even say there's a supply closet, but they're in a supermarket.
Sense.
They're in a supermarket. Of course there's going to be a supply closet. I didn't even think about it. Yeah, great. Go ahead. I didn't need to prep the supply closet for that to happen, right?
The Quantum Ogre something like is one of those things that when the player realize that you're doing that, you're gonna fucking kill their agency, because now they feel like, well, it doesn't matter the choice.
It doesn't matter. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And I think that's the point. Like you're the choice that the players make need to some extent to matter, right? Mm-hmm. And I often say that I'm a big proponent of like keeping your setting vague. Like if you come on and you have like everything defined in your setting, first you have to do lorddom, and the player won't care that much and stuff like that. But I'm okay with letting my player add things. You know what I mean? It's a medieval setting. Okay, we're gonna be like a feudal. Like you can tell me who the Baron is. Oh, like this Baron over there. Yeah, he's a real asshole. Okay, you just made it canon. I say like roll with the punches. I think like learning to do that, and not every GM is gonna like that, but I like coming with like less prep to leave more room to the player to add their own thing when they have an idea, when they have a thing like that. It makes the whole thing much more interesting for me first. But
that's a really good point, Max, because if everything has been delineated in advance, everything, like, so you have the heraldry of that Baron going back 7 generations. You have everyone in his family. You have all of this. You've spent all this time. Where is the space for players to feel like they have a lot of input into how the world looks? And like you said, not everyone's going to want that, but I think that allowing players to the flexibility and the room to create something where they feel like this is something I think that's a good thing. And I think that'll encourage more active players.
In the context of like a traditional adventuring party, you would hope that there are unknowns, right? Because that they are, presumably these characters are exploring things that are unknown. They will go to various NPCs and ask about a region they're about to go into, and most of them are going to go, I don't know. Nobody's ever been there before, or everybody that's gone there ends up dead. So that's when you have that sort of nuances and those unknown variables, it can become more exciting to go into those areas and figure things out as it's going.
And it's the same thing also and knowing that also will lift a lot of works on you as a GM. The players are heading toward a village. You don't need to detail the whole village. We understand it's this kind of village. It's a medieval village, or it's a 1920s village. You're going to find things that are too expected in that setting. Then the player want to add something to the village and it makes sense, let it roll. Like if they have an idea, it's always come back to that thing. And because every time you say no, in a way, and I'm not saying to say yes at everything, because if they add something that is unreasonable, sometimes you have to rein them in. But if they have an idea, if they try to propose something, and if it's unreasonable, and you say, well, no, it's too small a village for that, they understand. They were not gonna, but if it's just like because they have an idea that would be reasonable, and then you say no, you're training them to be passive. You're punishing them, and then you're gonna go back to the asking question.
I was just about to say that you train them to go, oh, okay, well, that's not there. Well, to stop from retconning constantly, I'm just going to ask, is this here? Is that there? Is that?
Mhm.
And then you can run into the issue of a GM is going, well, now the burden's on me to answer one way or the other. Whereas if it's framed more as I'm going to look for, I don't know, a chest under the floor, and it's like, oh, okay, interesting idea. Is that there? And you could randomize that if you don't feel like totally using GM fiat there. But if a player is doing something either that makes sense in the scene, or where I'll have times like this all the time where I as a GM go, oh, I never thought of that, but that's an awesome idea. Yeah, it's true now. It wasn't true before you said it, but it is now.
Another benefit of letting your player add things and add NPC as well. It makes your world feel more lived in, because oftentimes, like we do the Mindscape, we can have the impression that the streets are empty all the time. You're in like a 1920 city,
right?
And the player just say like, oh, I just ask a woman that walked by the street for a cigarette.
Yeah.
Then suddenly there's somebody walking down the street. You know what I mean? You add
Right.
something to the world that make the world feel more lived
And it
in.
puts the characters in that world too. Because I feel a lot of the times it feels like these characters, which are adults, often feel very out of place and feel like they don't know anything about the world that we're in, because the characters, even if the players aren't asking the GM questions, if the characters are constantly going around asking NPCs like basic world facts, then it's just like, what the hell? You start getting strange
Is this your
looks.
first
like,
day?
What?
You just arrived?
Yeah, and you're playing like a 40-year-old dude or something. Let's see. And it's like,
if it passes a plausibility test, like that's
Yeah.
usually what I say. Is this plausible? Not is it possible? I mean, anything's possible, or virtually anything's possible. But is it plausible? And if it's plausible, then let's run with it and encourage players to think of those things.
And lots of that's where you get into things like session 0, where you go, okay, this is the sort of tech level we're presumed to be playing in. This
Exactly. So there's parameters. You have to stay within the parameters. Otherwise, there is no such thing as plausible. If you set some clear guidelines of, okay, so this is, you can imagine this, and this is, and if you're going to change that, or if I'm going to change that by some significant way, then I'll tell that in advance so they understand, okay, then there's some plausibility there. So, and that's my, but I definitely like the idea that players help add resolution to the world by what they're doing. And that can involve things like, I grew up in that town just over there. Well, what town? Like I didn't put that town on the map. That's fine. The player did, but it's plausible that there is a small town there and that they came from there. And that's one of the advantages of starting relatively small rather than starting on a huge epic.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that I was surprised with, but also I like a lot about DCC type games is that you start off, it's small, like you're just the villagers trying to fight off some threat, and the threat, all things considered, isn't that big. At least it won't be a few levels from now. But for now, it's this huge world-ending thing. And so you grab your rolling pin and your pitchfork, and away you go. And it's just, your world is small, and it grows as you jointly explore it.
And I don't know if you guys are wanting to move on to this, but that's a great way to that's a great way to move to how not just the GM and the players can make active players, but how the mechanics of a system.
I want to talk about the plausible thing a bit more before.
Okay,
I didn't get to say my piece. Yeah. The plausible thing, I think that, like you said, it's important to discuss the parameter in the session 0, I think. And it's also like, I'm a big proponent of getting like the world more mundane, and especially at the beginning of the campaign, then you add up the fantastical element, but the fantastical element are fantastical to the character as well. They go into the unknown and they meet the fantastical. It's not part of their daily life. When you go like into eye magic setting and stuff like that, it's much harder and it's much more arduous to define those parameters of what is plausible and what isn't, because your world that with so much magic, and then sometimes the magic is not considered. That's why I often say I'm a big proponent of the game Pendragon. because in Pendragon everybody play Human Knight, and I always say,
Is
like,
that the
playing-
drinking game on this channel, Max? So we all have to drink
Oh,
when we
it's-
say Pendragon?
If you want,
Okay.
Yeah.
if you want rapid liver failure, it's that. And every time he mentions Pendragon, and every time I mention Pathfinder.
I'm sorry, I
in
interrupted
movies.
you, Max. You were saying it's something more grounded in the mundane is a little easier to. It's
Yeah, and well, I often say, like, because everybody play like a Human Knight, then you forced to find something else to make your character this thing. So it pushed you to be like think about a personality of your character, but also because the world is more mundane.
right.
It's easier to agree upon what are the limit of the world and what is plausible in that world. So it's easier to leave room for the player to interject stuff without breaking your world, basically.
Right. Certainly it is more of a challenge when it's more high fantasy or some kind of crazy setting that you've come up with.
And there you need to define those parameters better. That's why I'm a proponent of hard magic systems, right? Because if the magic is too, there's a lot of writers for writing settings and game masters for running games that are like, oh, I don't need to explain. It's just magic, bro, is the answer to everything. And it's like, well, if it's just magic, bro, I'm going to wave my hand and just magic away the enemy, right?
Well, and that's where you run into the plausibility problem, right? So I'm asking players to be more involved in creation of the world, but then I've got I may have mentioned this already in a different conversation, but there's plenty of studies that show how kids play in playgrounds. And if you want the kids to play in the whole playground, the thing is you put a fence around the playground. If you don't have a fence around the playground, then there's studies that show this, that if you have no fence on the playground, then kids stay right in the center of the field, or right, like they don't. But as soon as you put a fence around it, then there's the border, there's the parameters, and so anything is possible within that parameter, or anything is plausible, perhaps is a better way of putting it.
Especially because I think the majority of us like pushing boundaries. And if we don't know what the boundaries are, then there's nothing really, to test there. I don't know if I've run into an obnoxious version of this before, but only once, which is, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to do exactly what I think the GM doesn't want us to do. And I'm perfectly fine with that. But the problem in this case was the guy was saying stuff like that out of character. Like, I'm going to go over here because I think that's where the plot isn't. It's like, I don't have a plot, dude. Like, what are you, where are you presuming this? But I mean, it goes to show, once there is that idea of a boundary, people are like, ooh, okay. I wonder, it almost becomes an unspoken game where it's like, what exactly can I do within this sandbox?
That player that say like, oh, I'm gonna go there because like I think that's where the plot isn't. Like he doesn't understand. That's not an active player in the sense that he doesn't understand. Like there is no plot. You are making the plot. The action that you take. Like there's not you're not running your character through the story. You're making the story through the action of your character. That's what we're doing here.
Yeah, he was like headed. That's what was so frustrating about that, is because he was headed towards the right direction. He was taking independent individual action, but it was totally purposeless. It was for an out of character, out of the game setting purpose, but it did make me think of that. So I was like,
The other thing also that I find oftentimes is not well defined in a game, and especially when you're like in more high fantasy game, or like it's what the player know of the world and know of this fantasy as well, because that it become hard. Like, is it common for you to see dwarves and elves, and or is it like something rare? Is it like is it likely that you've seen magic being performed before, or is the first time you're going to be a spell go off? It's going to be like probably the first time. Those parameters as well need to be included just for character reacting to those events that happen in the world.
Yeah, that's a good point, Max, because we had that come up in our game last night, didn't we? Like, I drop into a game, I don't really have a lot of background. I wasn't there for the session 0. One of the characters is an elf, and so I decided just in the spur of the moment, this is the first elf I've ever seen. And Rick, who's running the game, to his credit, he's like, he didn't correct me. He didn't say, oh, no, elves are pretty common, dude.
Exactly. If that wasn't defined, how common our elves are, and then a player see an elf and react like, oh my, an elf,
an elf, like what is this? Then
you created something in your world, Exactly. Like now, like roll with it. Don't say, well, actually, like there's an elf baker on the corner of the street. That doesn't matter. Just change it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Don't like you have to be willing. Like it's a collaborative effort when we do the game. As a GM, you have to be willing to kill your darling in a way, like because you
Yes.
want to leave room for the player.
And
Yes. Yeah.
likewise, in the inverse, if a character is playing a race, especially when like oddball races in a lot of games where it'll have like almost no description, it'll have like a physical description and some stats, and then that's it. And that's room for the player that's playing that race to make stuff up about it, that fill in the blanks themselves as they play. What
And it's
kind
important.
of diet
I mean,
do they eat? What kind of
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that it is important to when we're talking about having players introduce plausible things in the world to fill out increase the resolution of the world as we go. It does put a bit of an onus on us when we're running the game that we remain consistent to that. So once something plausible has been accepted, even if it's accepted just because I don't have someone in the world contradict the player. And I mentioned that because if a player says, "Oh, I'm going to go and see this," or "This is a town, great, I'm going to go buy a Ferrari in this town." Well, it's a town of 3,000 people. Like the median income is $24,000 a year. They're not going to have a Ferrari dealership. I'm not going to tell the player that as the game master. I'll just have like the local used car lot. When he walks in, he's like, "Yeah, I'm looking for a Ferrari," and the guy's just going to laugh him out of the shop.
If he
so it's
gets
an in character, in world response. But back to my point though, the point is that once we've agreed on that, like once I've accepted something that was plausible, that was introduced by a player, that defines that thing that way, and it must be consistent. Because part of encouraging players to be active in the world is that once they have created something, that's no longer an ambiguous thing. It's a defined thing.
Yep.
So
it requires good note taking.
Well, like someone said something about like the broom closet. Once they find the broom closet is always there. It's there. I can't just suddenly. Yeah. Oh yeah. By the way, that's not actually what it was. It was something.
Yeah. You can't go if you have a map of the store or whatever where there isn't a broom closet. You need to remember there's a broom closet even though it's not there on your map, and not go, "Oh no, that's not there." What are you talking about?
Or the race thing. Like, okay, so my character has never seen an elf before. Now, like, okay, I have to be consistent with that. I should be holding myself to that standard. So if I make a big deal about meeting this elf, then I should play it that way, at least until I'm familiar with the elf, and I should be in character responding to that other NPC, or in this case a PC, like this is a new novel thing for me. If all of a sudden it's just old hat, then I'm not being consistent to what I've created.
Yeah, you're playing a race that's maybe like a lizard folk, and there's not much a lizard man, and there's not much written about them other than that you just decide on the fly. It's like somebody passes you a trail ration, like, what the hell, we're obligate carnivores. I don't want that. Then it's like, oh well, that's true now. That's true, or it was pulling your leg.
The same line of idea, because Tyler, you mentioned like a map there, and that's also like I'm a big I like the theater of the mind kind of thing, or like if you want to play with a map, like maybe for combat, just do a battle map with like Sharpie and stuff like that. Keep it simple. And I'm not a big fan of VTT because of that, because the more you invest time into doing your prep, into like, oh, okay, we're gonna have an encounter there, and then you create the map and all stuff like that. Now you fixed thing, things become fixed because you put all this work, and they're also going to push you to the quantum ogre kind of thing, like, I put all this time developing this encounter, they're going to fucking meet that encounter, right?
Yeah, they better. I did all the line of sight and the lighting, and are you kidding me? You're going to go here no matter what.
Yeah. You see like those GM like putting like hours, and it's not only that I'm lazy. Maybe it's part of that. No, truly, it's not that I'm lazy, because like I used to do that, and I used to enjoy that part as well. Like I used to enjoy the part of the like world building and stuff like that. But then when I come to the table, I would enjoy it less because I wasn't getting a surprise. There wasn't like this like collaborative effort. There wasn't like, and I couldn't roll with the punch. And now, like, at some point you did put the work in, you want to use it,
And then you can feel like to generate that, you need to do even more prep, because it can feel like, oh, okay, I need to put more toys on the map for them to interact with, for, you know, and then very often I find the most interesting thing is when you're doing your prep work, if you're thinking in your head, you know, here's 2 or 3 possible solutions to this problem. It's when your players come up with the 3rd or 4th one. That's
also something I often say. As a GM, you're there to provide like challenge and provide a position to the PCs. You're not there to think of solution. That's their job. You know, there's something happening in the world. Like, don't think like, oh, okay, they can solve it in that way, or that way, because now you just want to choose your adventure path.
And, you know, even in video games, it's, you know, everyone hates the design of, oh, it's the big orange weak spot. I guess I have to shoot that so it dies. And it's just invulnerable everywhere else. And
in a way, maps are like that. Like so I've done a lot of work on maps. I would draw my own. I would steal them from the internet. I would pay for them. All of that. The problem that I'm finding now with maps, especially when I'm now much more interested in having active players, the map telegraphs too much, in my opinion. Like it's okay. So you don't have to really pay attention until I draw a map, and now you have to pay attention. Now you have to think about where I am in the world. Now you have to decide, oh, now we know that there's going to be an encounter here because here Crispy's dropping a map. And so as he drops the map, then we know, okay, now I pay attention. Well, I want you to be active and paying attention the whole time. I don't want you to be relying on a visual cue. Oh, well, he's revealed the map. Now it's time for me to get off my phone. Now it's time for me to pay attention.
Yeah.
We don't have a map. Oh, so this means that now we can do the dialogue stuff. I don't really have to pay attention. I don't like telegraphing like that.
It puts you in a very different mindset as well, because like instead of like trying to visualize what's happening in your head and keeping the flow going and keeping like when you're just in the mindscape, when you're just like in theater of the mind or whatever, you want to keep the flow of information coming because you need to feed that mindscape that you're building in your head, right?
Yeah.
This visualization that you put.
Like Bleeker has a comment here about maps, and I think he's I think it's good because what I've done now is I just again, because I'm encouraging players to be more active. I encourage players to have like a little scratch piece of paper, and they'll sketch out a quick map, and in some cases, especially if there's something that I really don't want player confusion, because I feel like that just causes players to check out. So I will at times, just a quick sketch. Okay, here. I'm very, very low resolution because I want I want the resolution to come through the play, but it can be helpful. I'm not one that goes so far as to say I'll never use a map again. I absolutely will use maps again, but I don't want to have it be such an expectation that as soon as the players just aren't really paying attention until the map's in front of them, I want them to be thinking.
That's why I like the map, like to be like you say, like more low resolution, like almost like abstract. It's just like if you use them, stuff like I say, like sometimes I'm gonna use a battle map just to, just show with a Sharpie line, whatever. And because I find like when you have like the detailed map, shut up a bit, Tyler. When you have like the detailed map, I'm aggressive. You know that, you haven't heard the rumor. When you have the detailed map, you like the player, like that's what I was saying. Like it takes the player out of the mindscape, and now they're gonna look at the map and then analyze the map, and they're gonna try to find the advantage on the map instead of like creating it in their mind, right? Instead of creating the vision in their mind, visualizing what's happening. Now they're analyzing, instead of visualizing. It's different kind of mindset, and I don't find that it favorizes the active type of player, because now I'm not gonna add what's around, what's in the world and stuff like that. Because I'm gonna pick up what's in the world on the map.
And I wanted to follow up with this, that just because the DM throws down the map doesn't mean the DM needs to force the encounter. It's less about the DM forcing the encounter and more about the players. Well, often I'll find an issue with not having active players is that they're too nice and they don't want to interrupt people. And generally, when your players are nice and agreeable, they'll say, oh, you spent so much time on this map. They're not saying this, but they're thinking in their head, oh, you spent a lot of time on this. I'm not just going to go totally off kilter. No, I'm going to interact with the thing you spent a lot of time on. So it's not about the DM forcing the encounter so much as does it encourage players to do other stuff. And it's like, well, if you've laid out this map with visible solutions. And there's a technical issue here too, right? Yeah, you can, if they go somewhere else, throw together a map, with Scratch. But if your players are used to the very, pretty handcrafted maps, now the illusion starts to break down because all of a sudden they go, oh, he didn't prep this. I can tell he didn't prep this because this map is at a Sharpie. And the last one, he got his hot foam wire cutter out and made like a whole 3-dimensional battle map. So it's less about the DM forcing things, which is an issue, and more about signal. Yeah. You're sending you're sending a signal that, oh, okay,
this matters.
Yeah, this matters. It's not, he's done all this prep work, and then you can of course get into a conversation of, should I be prepping a lot for you guys if we're not using any of my maps,
And not only that, also, like, we say, like, yeah, a good GM will be willing to throw away his map that he prepped. But let's be honest, it's harder.
It's tempting. Yeah, there's always that temptation, right?
And not only that, but if you prepped a lot of map, just the fact of prepping those maps, it made you think in advance what you think is gonna happen, and then you're less likely to be reactive because you already made an idea of where the game is gonna go. If the player there's always gonna be this temptation to push back. So that's why I say, like anyway, for me, I cannot speak for everybody, but for me, I enjoyed my time at the table much more. Even though I did enjoy the time prepping, I enjoy my time at the table much more when I cut on the prep.
Yeah,
and I still like to paint mini. That's the worst part.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah,
but I don't use them.
And I find I'm not using them as much. I'll have to find something to use for.
It is a player issue. Yeah. But we're tackling this from the perspective that we want active players. So we would like to generate things. We would like to generate scenarios where we do have active players. So while, yes, that might be a problem with the player's mindset, we'd prefer to work in a way that the players are acting upon things and we're not, we don't want to just lead guys through the pretty scenery we've built and go, have effectively a thinly veiled art contest, an art gallery in our homes. As fun as that could be,
I don't know. I kind of like my minis. I just don't use them in the game anymore.
Yeah, but that's for before and after. Hey guys, I just finished painting this. Isn't this cool? Yeah. Cool.
I wanted to talk a bit about, like, if we, maybe there's a guy that wants to join your table, and he comes from a table that, like, with a GM that railroaded a bit more, but he's tired of it, and now he's coming join the table. He's all scarred, and now you want to turn him into a active player. How would you go about it? Like, Crispy talked about a bit, like, leading by example, like saying that's what I want to work, but that's what I'm trying to do. But how can you identify if somebody has the potential to becoming an active player? So I guess somebody never will. But
that's a good question, because there's some I think there's somewhere I think we probably have to decide in advance. We have to agree on the kind of game we want together, and if we're just not interested in that, we think that's just a little too, I don't know, cheesy or what have you, then I think there is a limit, Max, in how much we can say, look, we're looking for more active players, as we've defined in the context of this conversation. There's some that's just gonna be like, no, you know what, I'm not into that, and I'm not one to I don't think that it's a very successful strategy to just say, well, no, I'm gonna force you to enjoy the hobby the way I want to enjoy it. Like, I think it's better to try to find people that are going to approach it from the same mindset.
Yeah. So you need to find the table that is right for you. That's always something that we agree upon here as well.
Now, that said, I did approach my in-person game. I've been running an in-person game now continuously on a weekly basis for about 17 years. And I know there'll be others that have done that, but this is the same group for 17 years. And I'm sure there's some in chat that like, God, 17 years, you're still wet behind the ears. And fair enough. That's maybe the case. But what I did is I approached the definition of what I was looking for in terms of more active play rather than passive play, as I want to improve your experience in the game by giving you more control. Giving up some of the control that I have within these parameters, of course, but I want to give you more of that. And I sold it to them on that basis that I'm trying to take a little less off my plate by giving it to you in the best way that I can think of, where you will have more enjoyment. And that was just heralding back to, why did you enjoy this in the first place? Like, why did you get into this game in the first place? And I'm like, oh, well, I thought it was fantastic that I could be I can choose this role, and I can be a fighter, and I could do this. And I thought that was cool. And normally I'm an accountant, and I'm just happy to be a fighter for now. I was like, well, it's great. I want you to do more of that. So that's how I sold it to my players. And then over time, when they got just a little bit of a taste of it, we'd talk about it, say, well, what was different about that? And then they would say, well, it just felt like I was more there. I was more in the world. The world seemed more real to me because we were right into it. And I felt like my decisions mattered. And I think that worked for my group, that we did that after having played, I would say, mostly in a passive way. Just like, oh, well, Crispy's got a pretty interesting plot line here. We'll just follow that to wherever it goes. And now I'm not approaching it that same way. Totally different. But there is a limit, is what I'm saying. There's a limit. If you're like, no, I really just want to have more of a war game-ish, tactical, and I've done that. I've done that. I've done the measuring sticks and line of sight lines, and
if what they like about the game
radiuses and
game mechanics, then this probably isn't going to matter as much to them, right?
Well, I don't think that the two are necessarily in a position, because you can have like this, even if you like to interact with the game mechanics, and I do, like I'm a big like system guy. I like thinking about like game rules. I'm a big into game design and stuff like that. But it doesn't matter when I'm at a table. I want to get in my character, and I want to say what my character does in the world. I don't want to be told a story. I want to, or if I'm the GM, I want to tell you a story. But when we can still interact with the mechanic, and if you have
it's important. The mechanics are really important, Max. I agree with you, because the mechanics, it in a sense, it's the built-in parameters. So and I think it's really important that the players all understand the mechanics, because that is in a way that will be the parameters in which they can interact with the world. And if they understand the mechanics, then that can encourage role play, provided that the mechanics are not so arcane, so impossible to keep in your head. If the mechanic is somewhat like I talked about DCC before, and I do love the game. And I love Weird Frontiers. It's fantastic. However, it has some drawbacks. No game is perfect. It has some drawbacks. And one of the drawbacks is in some cases, and especially Weird Frontiers, there are some classes where the mechanics are they're very random, and we played it and we loved the randomness of it, but it's hard to keep the mechanics in your head, in the sense of I have no idea what my gambler will do when he's going to do this, but I have no idea how it's going to play out. Just none.
You can totally run into issues where I've been there as a player. I've seen my players be there, where a scene is going and they're trying to plan out what they're going to do, and they're staring down at their character sheet because they're like, oh my God, I have no idea what I can do. And then the scene has passed them by. And so they've spent 5-10 minutes without saying anything, because they've just been flooded with random giant tables and lists of where it's like, okay, I could do this, and then that would, be, and then, somebody else already resolved the problem. Oh, all right. Well, you simultaneously, though, don't want a system that's so simple where it feels like the solution is the same every time, where it's like, some systems can run into the issue of looking at stuff is really, really useful. I roll perception. My answer in every scene is I roll perception. And you can get onto autopilot where you're just like, whatever. Yeah.
I do the thing. I just do the thing.
I do the thing,
I'm going to try it out.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a very valid criticism. And I think that's a situation where maybe the mechanics are either a little too much for for improvisation. I like mechanics that encourage like game mechanics that encourage players to think outside the box. Like you could do this in some different way, and it was one of the things that I liked about the in Savage Worlds for their powers. When you select your power, which essentially like a spell or magical ability, you decide what the trappings of the power are, and the trappings of that power will change it from one. Like, so yeah, it's a bolt power. So I'm just shooting what energy? No, I choose when I have that power what it is, and then how that interacts with the world and how I can use that in inventive ways depends on how I described this power. And so there's some player again, like I said earlier, it should be consistent. So if it just changes every time, then not as keen with that.
Like that, I like to remind my players that you aren't limited by, even in a crunchier system, you're not limited to, this is a list of the only things you can do is in the rulebook. No, you can do anything that this character would be able to do. If it's not in the rulebook, I'll have to make up some numbers on the fly. That's not the end of the world.
If it's plausible within the framework of the mechanic, then I think it encourages players to be inventive. Like, well, what if I could use this one thing I could do but differently?
Yeah, okay. For an example, rules is written. A way to discourage a player from being active is, let's say you need a hand free to grapple. Well, what if my player is like, I'm gonna wind my sword around him and pull his hands down and then slash him in the face or something like that? It would discourage that sort of creativity if I go, you need 2 hands free to grapple. You can't do that. And then they go, okay. Well, what else can I do? And then they go back. They end up playing the character sheet instead of just doing what their character would do.
There's absolutely like game system that, like the rules tell you like how the game is supposed to be played, right? And if they're very rule light, there's a lot of like honest on the player, like to make up shit on the fly, and oftentimes, like you said, Tyler, it's oftentimes going to be like the same thing that's going to end up, because like everything is going to be the same role, because you have like 3 roles you can make basically, right? And which is not necessarily great. That's why I like a skill-based game a lot, and especially like skill-based game with a broad list of skill, because just by glancing at it's too much for the player to look at the different skill as button to press, because they cannot necessarily remember them all. But by glancing at the table, they have the impression there's a lot of things they can do, and that whatever they want to do, there's probably going to be a skill that applied to it. So they're just going to say, I'm going to act to this computer there, right? Roll your computer science or whatever. Just like,
sure.
There's something you can you can do that. Like, you encourage them to think that like the box is big enough that they're not going to look first. And then try to say something. They're going to say what they try to do, and then like you can interject. Okay, roll that and roll.
So what I always want, in a sentence, I tell my players, tell me what you're doing, then we will find the mechanic that supports that. I don't want to lead with the mechanic and then find a description for what's happened.
But it's also you don't look at the solution on the character sheet. You look at the solution, what's happening in the scene, what's happening in your mind, in your mindscape that you created. That's where the solution should be. Not
how do you handle it when you have a player that is a stickler for the rules, like 1 hand free to grapple, until he wants an advantage for himself and wants to grapple without 1 hand free? I think there's actually 2 questions here. One is, what do you do when you have a player that's a stickler for the rules? Well, session 0 social contract. I know those are the get out of jail free cards, but honestly though, you need to be clear with your players in your session 0, in your, if you didn't have one, in your Discord messages or whatever it is you're using. Hey, this is what's in the rule book are things you can absolutely do, and we don't need to, nothing, but they are examples. They're not limiters, right? You can, they're Legos in your toolbox. There's no rule saying you can't pull out a brick of clay and add to your Legos, right?
I think there's a big thing there. Like the game side of thing is there to facilitate the emergent narrative, right? It's there, like it's the game part is important, but it's a tool. It's not the end in itself. at least in the way that I like to engage in this hobby. Some people like to engage in a different way. They're game first, rule first, and stuff like that. And that's the case. It's just like maybe we're not right for each other's table. You know what I mean? And that's all right. You know, there's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
So
Can I weigh in on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Crispy.
Yeah, go
well,
ahead.
I think what Bleecker is saying here is really good, because my take on it. Now, first of all, I hold myself to a pretty high standard. Not that I always meet it, but I want to understand the rules of the game we're playing as well as anyone. So I'll read the rule book cover to cover multiple times. I'll continue to read it as long as we're playing that game. I want to be, and because I think it's you mentioned social contract. It's me violating the social contract if I come to the game and I don't understand the game, and I'm supposed to be running the game. So I'm not a zero prep guy. I tried it. It was an abysmal failure. I told my players never again. Okay. So I will be prepared I'll know the rules. If I have a player that also really wants to know the rules, I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that player now knows the rules, the mechanics of the game, and then because they know the mechanics of the game, they can look for opportunities to be innovative, to use those mechanics in new ways. I actually see this as a positive. I'd also say in the way I would handle that is if a player really understands the rules. Let's take the almost always Byzantine rules of grappling. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say they really understand that. And then they have a situation where they know they're not quite meeting the letter of the law, so to speak. Then I don't see that player as having really any pushback to the game master when the game master ups the difficulty. Well, you're doing it unlike the ideal situation. So I have to set the difficulty. One of my big jobs as the game master is to set the difficulty of a task. Yeah. Well, obviously, if you're doing something that's not quite to the letter of the law,
if something says you can't do this or you must have a hand free, instead, you as a GM can take that as you get a -4 if you don't
whatever the mechanic is. Yeah. So I love it when players start reading the rules. My issue, and this is part of just where I live, most of my players don't have access to the rule books, right? They just don't.
That can be an issue, yeah.
I'm the ideal consumer that's, running the game, so buying all the stuff. And so the stuff is there at the table for them to use, but many of them don't have it at home, so they haven't had a chance to read through the whole thing. I would love it if they did, because I think that makes my job easier. So
I think knowing the
okay
rules
with
is
that.
Common courtesy. When you join a game, you want to have a fun. Like if you're not playing a wizard, I don't necessarily need you to understand how everything magic works. That's fair. If you're not playing a thief, you don't need to know every thief.
I need to know how your character works.
Yeah, exactly. Know where your character works and the core mechanics, right?
But to answer the second part of this question, they like the flexibility when it favors them and don't like the flexibility when it goes against them or for other people. Problem. I mean, that's a player that's trying to win the game.
Exactly. So my answer to this. Oh, sorry, Tyler. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, if you have a player that you see is trying to win the game, either for this specific, and not, if they're trying to win the game and it's unobtrusive, that's not a problem. But this is an example of where trying to win the game as a board game is actively intrusive to the role playing, because if they're going, hey, he's not allowed to do that, he's supposed to have 2 hands free to grapple, then an issue with this is that you have to talk to that player. So after the session, if it wasn't a total disaster, but you had a couple of those points where you're like, hey, I would prefer you didn't do this. If you have rules learned, hey, the system better than I do in these aspects, that's awesome. Tell me about it after the session, and now I'll make a note of that. Oh, okay, here's the rule we're supposed to go. Or I will tell you, I understand that's the way this is something I'll tell my players in a session 0. I understand how the rules work.
I want to talk about that a bit.
I may intentionally not be doing what the core rulebook says here. I may intentionally go, that's a stupid rule on the fly, and and make sure my players know that may occasionally happen where I look at a rule and realize in the moment, oh God, that's terrible. No, we're not using that. And so I would prefer my corrections, my rules lawyering, to be out of game, and then see, hey, are you here because you want to win a board game? Because if that's why you're here, we should play board games.
I want to talk about this comment a bit. It said, like, Bleaker say part of the downfall of 3.5e, I guess would be the same with Pathfinder, like two as player knowing the rules too well. And he had like 2.5 with his jam, by the way. And I think like 3.5 was a very game game. Like, it's almost a game for it. You have like those big mechanical parts, the feet and stuff like that. And yeah, that's where we saw like the build come in and stuff like that. And I wanted something about those type of games. Not that those type of games are wrong, but I don't think they're the type of game that necessarily promote the style of play, active play and reactive DM, active player, reactive DM. Is that a good name for it?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Sure.
That we promote here. And I think, to be honest, I think that for a big corporation, and that's also like a part of what we were saying about a bit earlier, like, or at least I was saying earlier, like I said, like, I like doing less prep to leave more room for the player to interject those stuff, to do their thing, right? That's not a good business model if you're a company. You cannot promote this type of play.
Sell
because
you can't exactly sell a piece of paper that just says, I don't know, you make it up.
Yeah, exactly. Are you going to sell those modules? Are you going to sell those maps? Are you going to sell like that?
So to suckers like me that buy it all. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's this thing with the big corporation, like the big company, like the WotC and the Paizo. Like I often say, like half jokingly, but kind of true, that WotC want you to teach you how to play the game wrong because they need you to keep depending on their product and stuff like that. They keep you to keep buying stuff.
And you can look at things like Adventurers League, which are very, very things like Adventurers League and Pathfinder Society play, even more restrictive than like a module would be, because they've got to be a guy's got to be able to move from this table to another table and be able to play the second game, and we need to we need to make sure, oh no, you can't use that, even though we printed this content. Here's the things you can't use of the stuff we sold you, and
of course, this is not going to be ideal for the type of play that we try to promote here. Like it's a different type of thing, different type of experience completely. But and this is not new, because even Gygax is known to have said, like, they had this dichotomy with him, like that he had to run a company and try to sell stuff, but at some point he is known to say, like, the secret that we don't want the players to know is that they don't need all those books.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not a new thing.
Yeah.
There's another thing I want to talk about, like because we're talking about games with mechanics that favorize active play, like a very active player. I think also, like, one thing that can help, I say, like, about the skill-based game, I think especially with a broad-based skill can help, in my opinion. I think also, if you have thing that you can do, like mechanical term, giving them name that are action-based help. Am I frozen?
Yeah. No, you're good.
Oh, okay. So that because you now if you use the name of a mechanic, and it's a name like Fury of the Small, right? Now you have to say the name of the mechanic. Oh, I use Fury of the Small, and now you're doing it in the mechanical talk, right?
Yeah, and you're like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
Whereas something like Stunning Fist, I kind of know what Stunning Fist. Oh, you're gonna punch the guy and you're gonna stun him.
Yeah, or if you're like an ability that's called like Skewer, whatever, even like a backstab, backstab him. Now you're like using you might be using the game mechanic term, but it flow into the sentence like you're describing your action. It's not like a arcane term like that might be thematic in some sense, but I think that's also help, like keeping
the 3.5 Pathfinder horrific example of that is Sacred Geometry, which is just like, I use Sacred Geometry, and it's like, you do what now? It's like, all right, well, I need to roll some dice.
Perfect triangle.
I need to add up numbers to get to my prime requisites, and you're just like, your eyes are glazing over. I think it's the most banned feat at like any table. Because just halts the game.
I'm glad, Max, you brought this up, because I do think especially when I'm introducing someone new to the hobby, I don't want them to have to. There are some things you have to learn. Like there's a lexicon that you have to understand, but is as much as I can limit that and just have them speak normally, they're gonna feel a little less apprehensive of speaking up, and I want them to speak up. So if they have to, okay, I have to list this, and then I do this, and then I have to list that. Essentially, they're teaching themselves a language, and I'd rather them just be able to describe. Like I keep on that with players, especially players that are just coming out of their shell, that are as new to the hobby. Just describe to me what you're doing in the world.
Yeah,
and then I know the rules well enough that I can tell you what to roll, and you'll get used to that.
That's what I was going to say is, if you do know the system better than your players, which you should ideally, and, you have a player that's, they're maybe not playing their turn as the game mechanics as well as they could be, but they're explaining it. Yeah, I run up and I smack the guy in the temple and I'm like, okay, well, I don't just roll, an attack. I'm going to give you the leeway. Roll me a stunning fist attempt. And they might have gone, oh yeah, I have that ability.
Well, and you're a Pathfinder first edition 3.5 guy like me originally. I haven't played that in a little while now, but you introduce that game to someone new, they have to learn an entire lexicon based around time. Is it a swift? Yeah. Is it immediate? Is it an interrupt? Is it a standard? Is it a move?
3.5 and Pathfinder are based. The designers have said this. It's explicitly based that system mastery, learning how the game works, is part of the game.
But I don't disagree. I do think that there's a good argument for system mastery. What I'm saying is, if I want people that are, if I want a player that's being a little passive to be more active, I want them to feel like they can use the language they already have, just normal language to describe it. And then I can, in my head, I'm okay. So that was a swift. Okay. That was this. Okay. I'm checking it out. And if I feel like, okay, they're starting to get into a time violation on their turn, then I can interrupt.
And then, then the guy stabs you.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think that's like, is that what you're going with, Max? That if you want to have active players, it's a mechanic that doesn't require an entire new language to be learned is probably preferable.
What I was talking is like, it's almost like more like an advice for game designers, like use game term flow naturally in the language.
Yeah.
So you can just use them as you describe your thing,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you something while you're on the subject. So when in our Castle and Crusade game, I play a thief, right? And sometimes a thief got the ability to backstab, and often going to try to describe that I'm getting in the back of the character. I'm going to try to stab him in the kidney or whatever, something like that, right? But basically, I'm doing a backstab. But I don't know if the creature I'm fighting is eligible to backstab or not, right? I find this is a bit hard because then if I just roll, I don't know if I should add my bonus. I don't know if he's unaware. I don't know if, there's those kind of thing. This is something like I find it sometimes hard to manage. And when I'm a GM, that's even the kind of control. If I'm with a good group of player that I know, that's the kind of control like I'm willing to relinquish. I say to my player, like, you can make the roll, and you can, if you use your good judgment, your good judgment on that. What do you thought on that?
I let players play out things that are not possible. So instead of saying, this thing's immune to crits, this thing's immune to sneak attacks or whatever, so don't bother rolling it. Then your player goes like, oh, okay. And instead, play it out. Let them roll. Go ahead. Keep rolling that. Is what I'm thinking in my head. Meanwhile, I know. You pull your knife out of this thing and there's no blood on it. Because he's backstabbed what he thought was a dude, and it turns out no, it's like a desiccated walking corpse. And it turns around, and then it's like, oh crap, And it that level of like shock it's in character. It's in the world rather than just being disappointed. Oh, I couldn't use a thing. No. Okay, well, I know it's something weird then now,
Yeah, but then you already had the roll, so you're kind of open to the retcon as well. Like, did I hit? Did I not hit? What do you think, Crispy?
Well, I think there's some solutions here, and I really do like how it was working in our Castles and Crusade game last night, where we're essentially tag teaming these enemies. I'm playing a rather portly cleric, and I'm trying to draw the attention of the bad guys. Meanwhile, I'm motioning or even saying in character to Max's thief, I'll draw their attention. You get behind him or go into flanking. And the game master, to his credit, or castle keeper, I guess they're called, he was picking up on that. So when he would say, like, so Max, you had said a few times, like, plunge my dagger into the back of his what was it? It was really awesome. It was like the back of the knee, right? And the game master, and I didn't think it was obtrusive at all for the game master to say, add 2 to that roll, or add 4 to that roll, or whatever he was doing. Like, it was quick. It didn't for me. It didn't break any immersion at all. And it was clear that he was listening intently to your descriptions. And I think that's really the key takeaway from that experience, is that if I want to encourage active players to be describing like you did with your thief, or me, the more than slightly overweight guy trying to climb the side of a carriage and slide down the back side of it because it was just I just couldn't do a pull up to save my life. If I'm paying attention to that, if I'm paying attention to those descriptions that the players are making, then it's not that difficult to see, oh yeah, I'm going to give the player an advantage here, or I'm going to give the player a disadvantage here based on this.
Likewise, something I've started doing recently that I've found helps a lot with getting players more active is having them describe their successes. So, okay, roll me, roll an attack. Yeah, you hit. And that's all I say. And then they can describe what that hit looks like. They know how much damage it does, right? If it did 7 damage in Pathfinder and they're at level 15, they know it's not going to take the dude's head off. They know that contextualization, So
yeah, I didn't find it immersion breaking. What did you think, Max, when like Rick would say, you finish them off, and then you could say what it looked like at that point, because we hadn't determined whether or not the blow landed, and he said, yeah, it's mortal blow, or it's a devastating blow or something.
To be honest, that's something like, especially when you come to a D&D type game, when you have like a static AC, that's something like maybe a bit of a controversial opinion I have, because a lot of people disagree with that. But I say, just tell the AC to the player, because I like to minimize the mechanical talk as much as possible, right? And if we say like the player can describe their success, can describe their action, but now if I have to roll and wait for you to tell me if I hit or not, first I find it slow the game down, and then we have like this unnecessary back and forth. If I knew the EC, not only speed up the game, because I'm only calculate, like, I know the bonus I add to my die roll, so I'm only gonna calculate what I need on the dice once, right? Then it's very fast. You roll the dice. Is it more than a 10? Yes, I hit. And I can go right away. I don't even need to say what I roll. I don't even need to ask the GM if I hit or not, because I know, and I can go right into description. I think like telling some people say, oh, I want to keep the mystery and stuff like that. I say, yes, I see that, but I think the trade-off is not worth it. If you just,
it's a trade-off.
You might tell, you might say on the first, on the first hit, maybe say, okay, that's what you're gonna need to hit, right?
Because
most players after like one round, they'll have figured it out anyway.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll even hear your players going, oh, well, an 18 hit him this round, but a 16 didn't hit him, so it must be 17 or 18. And it's like, I don't want to hear that sort of, thing. Even if you can see the gears turning in their head, it's kind of like, dang it, they're not thinking about the scene, they're thinking about the mechanics. And and I like mechanics. Obviously, I'm a first edition Pathfinder.
I think there's
I think it's best if you, and I think what I'm going to do is, because I am one of the people that's hidden this, and you're right, it's just not been at the top of the list of changes, and I don't like making a ton of changes every session, right? Because then it gets hard to keep track of what's improving where. But I think this is something I'm going to do is, after the first hit, I'll just leave AC, hit or miss, whatever, because then you can give you see this lumbering dude in full plate, but he's actually incredibly dexterous. It's very well made full plate. You know, you don't even hit him and it doesn't damage him. He just dodges clean out of the way, and it's like, whoa. And then there's that shock factor of the first blow missing. But yeah,
I also find like the guessing game, to be honest, like kind of can take some player out of the narrative mindset. You know, not like they're into trying to figure out the math, right?
Yeah.
So
I've experimented with both, Max, and yeah, I find well, it kind of depends, but in the situation, usually I'm just going to say, I'm going to announce what the DC is, and then they know what it is, and they can just describe it, because I do think it's encouraging. It encourages players to be more involved if they can describe their blows. Like if they just instead of just I swing, I miss, I swing, I miss, I swing, I miss.
Bleeker's question.
I would much prefer. I like to describe how I'm swinging. So like in our game last night, I'm using a Warhammer as this cleric. And so I'm describing, both hands on the hilt. I grunt as I go overhead with I'm swinging down from overhead. I didn't describe me hitting yet until the dice fall where they may. But I actually like being able to describe the success. But in my in-person game, it's kind of odd, because as much as I like doing that as a player, my players, they're like, no, we'd prefer you describe the success. And then if we fail, like if I don't roll high enough, the dice aren't in my favor, then my players like to describe their failures. Now that might just be an odd thing in my group, but they enjoy doing that. And sometimes it's just a quick, I miss, like that's fine. It doesn't have to be 7 paragraphs of exhausted text of how I missed. I just missed.
Especially if it's taking place over the course of 6 seconds. Then
it can be quick. But I do prefer describing how I'm attacking. And again, I don't want to be a time hog. Like this can be a bit of a problem, especially with big 4-headed men like me, where we'll just wax poetic on everything. Come on, like this is the 17th arrow that you shot. Can we please dispense with the the creaking of the bowstring as I pull back to my ear and anchor point? And
that's also something I agree.
Come on,
I yet again aim at the same target that I've been missing. Cursing
and
whatever.
That's also part of the reason. That's also part of the reason that I like having the AC up front, to be honest, because like now you don't have to describe. You can just describe what's happening. You don't have to describe what you try to do. Which is again, I tried to hit him, and then you try to find a new way to hit him. No, you can just make your roll. You're gonna attack. You make your roll, and then you describe if you hit or you describe if you miss right away, right? You know what I mean? You don't have to. It's not like it doesn't become like a two-phase process where you have to describe you trying to hit and then what actually happened. You know what I mean? It just becomes like, here's what I did.
That's right. I usually, if I were to say how frequent, like which of the two I prefer just having the number known. Now, if my players had a higher degree of mechanics knowledge, then all I'd have to do is just describe what the opponent's wearing. Yep. And then like, oh, okay, that's full plate. Well, then I know I'm going to have to hit, like they already kind of know, right? Now that's maybe a bit of a high bar, because that's assuming that everyone will know off the top of their head, of all the armor types. Oh, he's got a shield, and he's okay.
Or you can bring it more. If you've got things like changing the accuracy of your strikes. Like 3.5. A lot of games actually have like power attack. You can hit the guy harder, but you're less accurate. They go oh, they see the guy's wearing full plate. Well, I'm going to start half sorting, and I'm not using power attack. I'm hunting for those little gaps with these little shorter, weaker attacks.
Yeah, and I just kind of trust my players to not cheat. So,
you need to trust your player. If you have to check your player, like you don't have the right player, you're not the right table.
I'm not babysitting anybody. Yeah.
There's one.
If I do, like if I have other players come to me and saying so and so is cheating in the game, then that's going to be a pretty short conversation with me. Like sorry, this isn't for you. Like I if I can't trust you, then
you don't get it.
Because how interesting is it? People hate Mary Sue's in movies. Why would you?
It's not about winning the game.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
You mentioned like earlier, Crispy, like time variation, and it's something like I want.
Yeah.
It's a bit outside the topic we're talking there. Maybe not. I want to talk about that. Like, how do you correct your player? Because I think that's a big thing
that's
as
a
well.
great. I think this actually is on topic because again, we're talking about having players being more active in the table, and what I try to do is just I start with a very simple description and say, look, your turn. You want to think of it this way: your turn is 2 sentences, and whatever you can do in the time that it says it takes you to say that, that's your turn. So that's how I try to avoid the time violation thing. So it's like, no, this is essentially real time. Like we're playing and I know it's not real time. Like we're not going to wait for you to drive to Houston and back. Like this is there's going to be some elements of fast travel, of course. But by setting some parameters on it to say, just tell me what you're doing right now. Like, I just want to know what you're doing right now. And that's all that it has to be. It doesn't have to be longer than that. And then that demystifies a little bit for players that are like, oh, I'm not even sure. Like, what do you is? And so that's how I handle the time violation, because there is a tendency. It's like, okay, well, I can just describe what I'm doing. Well, then right after I climb Mount Everest, I'll be over to the, well, I mean, no, you don't have time to do that. We're not playing unless you're playing a superheroes game or something, but you don't have time to do that. So it's what you can say in that moment is and anything beyond that, if you do want to describe something that's going to be taking a longer period of time, then when we do because we just stay, I don't know if you can call it initiative. We just stay in a turn order.
Yeah.
So we just stay in the turn order. And if you're doing something that, I'm crafting a new suit of armor. Okay, well, that's going to take some time. So as we do our turn order, you're going to take a break or what have you from doing that, and then you're back into the turn order. So that's how I handle that. But I do think it's important that especially if they're, well, I want to be more active in the game. How do I do that? Just try to think in the now. What are you doing right now? Yeah.
You see, I'm much more hello, Dice. I'm much more when we're not in combat, when we're not like initiative, where like every moment, like I call it action tempo. When we're like in interaction tempo, where like we don't have to count like every second, like things are very tense, stuff like that. When I'm much more freeform, I don't mind if you describe me something that's going to take a little longer. You know what I mean? Like, you want to fix the wagon wheel, I don't need to detail everything. You can just say like you don't need to say like, oh, okay, now I'm gonna carve down this part of tree, whatever, and just like I'm gonna try to make a shaft. Just tell me you fix the wagon wheel, and if it takes a few longer, if you want to tell me what you're doing and the intention of what you're trying to do, that's fine. I'm fine with that. Some action takes longer to do, right? You can just tell me what you're going to do that, and I'll skip you in the round. You know what I mean? I'll go like see what the other player do, and I'll come back to you when you're done what you told me you were going to do, or if there's an interruption in what you're going to do. But other than that, you told me something that's going to take 10 minutes to do. Well, I might not come back to you right away, but I'm going to go see. I always try to, basically, it's always like, I don't do like a strict round order.
No.
It's like the guy that told me the shortest time, the thing that's going to be done faster, I'm going to come back to you sooner.
Come back to him more often. Yep.
Yeah.
It's not a science. It's kind of more of an art when it's not.
Yeah.
But I was trying. That's what I was trying to do in our game last night. I was consciously trying to think. Okay, because I have a tendency to be a little too verbose, especially when we're not in let's say a life or death situation. So if we're just kind of interacting with the world, and so I would say things like, "Well, after I do this, I'm heading towards. So I'm already on my way over here." And then I just expect that, okay, well, it's going to take me a little bit of time to get there. And then when the castle keeper game master comes back to me, I assume that I'm there. Or how long did it take for me to get there? And so it can be tricky. I think it does require some finesse and people paying attention, both players and game master.
Yeah, that's something that is tricky, and like we often say, like, oh, you don't want to teleport your player, but if the player like I find like it's if the player say, oh, I'm heading toward the priestess, right, and then you go talk to somebody else on the table, and then you come back and say, okay, you're at the priestess, you just arrived at the priestess, you didn't teleport the player.
No, because I said I was going there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That follows, like you say, I'm going to the blacksmith. I say, okay, you arrive at the blacksmith. I didn't teleport you to the blacksmith. I moved the scene forward, and just like a way to say that, okay, you made it. Nothing happened on the way, basically. So it's just like a new scene establishing. So there's other way you can do it that are maybe a little more elegant, but I'm not offended by that. If the player didn't say anything, didn't say, "Oh, we're moving, we're going there," and then you say, "Oh, okay, you go to the blacksmith," then don't do that. That's also gonna train your player to be passive.
Yeah. That's true. It will absolutely. If you don't, if I can just wait and then you're gonna just move me around, then I don't have to say where I'm doing because you're just gonna tell me what I'm doing.
Likewise, I would say probably pump the brakes on some random encounters if you want this to be done right. Don't have you walk 2 feet and then you find 17 skeletons that are just wandering around, and one, it's nonsensical, but two, it's like, okay, well, I don't want to go off and do my own thing. I don't want to split the party because every time I do, I have to fight a million enemies. Well, okay, I'll just hang out with the group then. I won't rock the boat. So
this is also something like I think we can cue on movie. If it's a longer journey, right? We're gonna go to this, like it's gonna be a day walk to go to this other town that is far away. Okay, we're leaving. You can have like one scene on the road.
Sure.
And then when the scene is resolved, and that's going to lead us to the next question with a bleaker there. I'm going to put it on screen, then I'm going to read it. When the scene is resolved, like when okay, nothing is going to happen. It's just like a way to say, okay, you're on the road, you talked a bit, nothing happened. Now we move, you arrive at your destination, whatever. You can do one scene in the middle, and it doesn't need to be a big scene. And that's what I want to talk about there. Like Bleaker asked, what are your opinion about pointless role-playing? Do you think player bantering with another player about turnip season is being good active player? You want to?
Well, okay.
Who wants to take that first? I want me to take that, or you, Tyler? You got something to
definitely
have lots to say about this.
Because you guys have just been saying good stuff, and I've been like, I agree. I don't have anything to add. But here, is the bantering interesting? Right? Is it? I'm assuming, given that it's it's about turnip season, it's not particularly interesting bantering. There's a problem because not all bantering is created equal. Some, if we do look at movies or books or any other creative medium, some bantering is funny, some bantering is good. It adds humanity to the characters. It adds some lifelike aspects to the characters. So if that's all they're doing, every scene they just want to banter all the time, personally, what I would do as a GM is have, stuff, things are starting to drag, but this guy's still talking about turnips for the 5th minute in a row. Okay, well, you're seeing, the sun's starting to set, things are starting to move on, and sort of give the players hints of like, okay, move on. You've got a job to do. You did say you were going to go over here. You weren't going over here to talk about turnips, or, you can have an NPC like, dude, do you talk about anything? What's the obsession with turnips, man? Like, get to the deeper point of things. If it's like a recurring problem, and that's all they seem to want to do, if you have I think Shauner calls them like the tea time players, where that's all they want to do. Well, you can then push a little bit against them. That might be the time to have the random encounter to go, hey, do something active and interesting. If you're just sitting around, yapping all the time, the roads you're on are dangerous. There's going to be some bandits going, look at this clueless guy who's not paying attention. Yeah, let's stick him up.
You want to take that on, Crispy?
Yeah, I definitely want to take that on. So I hate that. Like I have very little patience for navel gazing, aimless conversations. Like if what I base it on, I don't know if anyone in chat, like you're familiar probably with the Jack Reacher Amazon series, but I like the Lee Child books, the Jack Reacher books, for how they handle dialogue. And I like that pacing of dialogue. So I have no problem whatsoever if there's going to be some banter between players. And I think that's important because it creates a link, right? And so I'll do that as if you watch me play well, I mean, I'm sorry in advance, but if you do watch some of what we do, then you'll notice I have no qualms whatsoever about striking up a conversation about some random thing with another player. However, it absolutely has to stay within the 2-sentence rule. Like I can't be just derailing something. So we're going to be talking about some esoteric topic that is not, it's not, and it just goes on and on and on. And I have seen this in live streams where you're watching them like, how long are we going to talk about your luggage? Okay. Like this is just too much. It's too
how
much.
long did, Tolkien is known for pretty lengthy descriptions.
Yeah. So
a lot of what we do is based on Tolkien, but how long do, the conversations about Limbus bread last?
Yeah.
They don't last pages and pages and pages, right?
No, they don't. So that's why I say Lee Child. Like if you go back to Lee Child and you read some Jack Reacher novels, and first of all, they're entertaining but it's a lot more punchy. It's just very, it's really into like, this is what's going on. And it's not a, yeah, you know what I'm referring to, but it's that's how so I don't actually even consider that role playing. Like, yes, you may actually be speaking in character kind of, but that's not what we're about. I want there to be motion. Things need to be happening. Otherwise, we're not going to role play the mundane. I have to live the mundane every day. And this is an escape from the mundane. And if you just want to sit around and you just want to talk about crop rotation forever and ever, then where's my X card? So I would just say, no, that's boring. Like, I don't want to play something that's boring.
It informs me that the character that they're playing is not yet a heroic character. They're not a protagonist. So something needs to happen to them for them to go to pick it. It's I play a lot of fighting games. Something we say is, pick up the sticks, dude, when someone's being too defensive. Because it's like they've just dropped their stick and they're just sitting there waiting for the opponent to kill themselves or something. And it's like, no, dude, you need to be the aggressor at some point here. Yeah. So
that's what I like banter. Like, just to finish off that thought, I do like banter. I do, but I do think that that if someone is just there to, it's tough because you have to know. As a player, you kind of have to read the room just as much as a game master as a player has to read a room. So that's a.
I totally am.
That's how I would handle it. But absolutely. I wouldn't feel any qualms whatsoever if I have players that are just sitting around and they're just talking about the weather.
Especially if they know they're riding horseback.
Yeah. Then someone comes running into the room. There's screams. There's some, like, the power goes out. There's an earthquake. Like, someone has a heart attack. I'm gonna give it to them so that as a clue that, look, guys, like, this is the most boring session that we've ever had, and I'm not about boring sessions. I want things happening.
Like, I don't mind if there's like a long interaction between characters, right? If they talk about stuff, that matter. Or sometimes they do talk about stuff that doesn't matter that much, but if it's character building, and you have to be able to tell the difference,
Yeah, you have to read the room. If it's just pointless, then and not character building and just someone trying to do a stand-up routine.
If it's like the fifth time, that they've talked about how their turnip crops are doing, and it's like, okay, have you made a character or have you made? Is all you have on your sheet turnip farmer? Is that why we keep coming back here? That might be part of the issue, is that the player doesn't actually have a character. Sometimes I find that's the opposite issue of the 20-page backstory, is they don't have it. They just have a one trick pony character, and that's all they do is they keep making the same joke over and over again, or
because like at some point you want to be able to have like those character building, and you want to have the character to be able to interact with each other and build those relationships. You want to have like this fire camp talk, right?
Yeah.
But if they just talk about if they don't talk about like something that matters to the characters, and they don't talk about their background, like why you fucking thief talk about like the turnip season, you wouldn't care about that.
You wouldn't care. Yeah.
But in the same time, when you were playing like this cleric of Peony, like which is like a nature kind of a goddess, and like the goddess of harvest and stuff like that, you know, we're talking about like this cow that's left, and then you do the moral to my character. You know, a cow is an important asset to a family, so that's okay because you know it's building something. You're trying to convince my character,
and your characters. You know, if your players are being active, they can tie it into a backstory they haven't pre-written, which we need to do an episode of backstories at some point. But you know, tie it into like, oh, you know, that's actually, you know, that's part of why I'm here is because, you know, our livelihood, our livestock, we're getting killed by these orcs or goblins or whatever the case may be. You can tie it into the big world threat, the reason for the adventure being, you know, that's, you know.
Yeah, and I would encourage people, because again, we're looking for active players. I would just tell my players, you have my permission to be interesting. Like, you can be interesting, and that's part of being a heroic, you know, one of the protagonists in whatever story this becomes. But like you can be interesting, and if that means you on the fly decide that you at one time were a pop star and there was a scandal and a sex tape and yada yada yada, hey, that's interesting. I'm okay with that. Like you can, instead of just being boring, like don't be boring, be interesting. Like you could be, I'm thinking of what's that? It's a the accountant. Okay, he's an autistic accountant, but he's interesting. There's things happening there. There's some interesting things there, and it's not just talking about mundane, boring stuff. Anyway, so it's a great topic. I'm glad that the commenter asked it, because
Bleaker say a lot of people think luggage stock is character building. That's the problem.
And that is the problem. And it's not interesting.
It is a problem, but like, how do you address this problem? Like, I'd say like maybe it's a bit like I wouldn't necessarily like because that's a big problem I see with like passive player. I see a lot of like people like that who say they want active player, but in the way that they correct a player being passive or doing some kind of transgression is actually like not helping. They're like forcing them almost. Like there's not, if like a player tried to do some role play and do the luggage talk and stuff like that, and you cut him off every time you do that, you know, he's gonna stop. Maybe like you might not have the desired outcome, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you have to
it may, that's a good point.
After the session, talk them like, you know what?
Yeah.
You know, this talk you did there, those kind of talk, if they're not character building, like try to explain them, like let's keep them short. It's okay to have those quirks, but you know, like make a point. We get it. You do small talk. You know, that's what you're expressing. The same thing like in movie when they say like a fight scene or a conversation of like that. It's not about like depicting the whole fight or conversation. It's about like passing a message, like saying what's happening, right?
Well, and some of that can be
the narrative.
That's right. Some of that luggage talk, it could just be, you could just say, well, I walk up to the front desk and I just engage in some small talk with the, you know, and I flirt a little bit with, you know, I don't want necessarily to have a word for word flirtation with some 45-year-old guy, and I'm pretending to be this front desk, this beleaguered front desk agent at the motel, and he's trying to make a move. And I mean, you don't have to be word. In fact, I'd prefer that not to be word for word. Thank you very much. You can just, like, for that kind of character building, you can just say in that description, well, I'm gonna talk up that girl, you know, the bombshell blonde at the bar in the cute little black dress. I walk up to her and I strike up a conversation. We're not going to have a word for word on the conversation. It's fine.
So fire anyway. By Dice Tale.
Like, and if you have other active players, I find they move this on pretty quickly. You know, if that conversation's going on too long, when the other players will go, "Hey, I think our mark's almost here." You know,
that's right.
Quiet it down. You know, you're going to alert the guy we're tailing, or you know, like, or just, you know, offhand, you know, give the hint, like, you know, maybe someone just very drolly said, you know, man, you really like turnips, huh?
Yeah,
it's sort of a hint of like, nobody else cares, dude. Let's
I bet in that sense of idea, there's another thing I want to say to GM out there that want to have more active player. Oftentimes what I see, from GM, which I think is a mistake. And you can give me your opinion about that. Oftentimes, a GM is going to ask a player what he does, and then the GM is going to narrate what he does, and then you go to the next player, and then he narrates, and the next player he narrates. I say, don't do that, because maybe a player says he's going to do what he's going to do, and the player next to him, one his character say, "Oh, yeah, I'll go with him," inject something like that. But now it's too late because you reply already. And especially when you play online, we try not to step on each other, right? And so we try to be quiet, not interject and stuff like that. So I say, don't be afraid as a GM to go around the table asking what the player want to do, and then you can narrate. Because oftentimes they're gonna go together, they're gonna do stuff, and they're gonna work as a team. So you don't have to because now you ask a player what he's going to do, and then you describe what he's going to do, and say, well, I guess I'm just sitting there waiting for him to be done. While he's fixing the card or whatever. Just like,
it leaves that opening where, oftentimes I've had a GM, slip on that and go back into asking, oh, what do you do? And I was like, well, I was just about to tell you what I was gonna do, but now it's like totally interrupted my train of thought, because I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, what was I going to do?
And it also come back on what I was talking earlier about time management, because if you tell me like, oh, I'm gonna go look in the wood for some mushroom, and then the other guy say, oh, I'm gonna fix the cartwheel, then I can gauge, like, I didn't have to narrate you going pick up the mushroom.
Yep.
And then I narrate, I can gauge which one's going to finish first, and then I'll go to narrate the other one, and come back to you when you're done or when something happens.
If your players aren't doing anything, I find this is something you'll find really quickly if this works for a given group or not. Don't be afraid of awkward silences.
Yeah,
describe a scene as a GM, and the wagon has arrived in a swampy terrain. You reached a bog that it looks pretty impassable. The wagon's just not going to make it over this. And then stop. And then just, if the players don't do anything and you're just still silent, eventually they'll realize, oh, it's time for us to do something. There's a problem. We need to solve it, and sooner and sooner that awkward silence gets shorter and shorter as they realize, oh, problem. It's our expectation that we need to solve the problem. It's not going to get solved for us, right?
Going around the table also, like without like jumping straight in narration, also give the chance to the player that doesn't really have an idea, just to be able to say, oh, I'll go with you, or I'll help you with that. You know what I mean? Maybe you don't have something to do. That's all right.
I think that you're absolutely right, Max. You can it's easy to over narrate. And when you put too much of your emphasis, or when I put too much of my emphasis into narrating everything that the players do, it slows things down too much. And it puts my flavor on things that I really shouldn't be putting my flavor on. Now, in person, I find the way I handle it in person is much, much easier than trying to do this online. Because in person, we're all there physically at the same table. And I just look at the next person, and then they go, and they go, and they go. And I don't have to say anything. And they just go around until such time as, oh yeah. So then they're like, okay, I'm going here. And now that does two things. First, it encourages players to be active listeners of everyone else instead of just of me. And I really, really want to work on that, because that, I think, is key. If you want to have active players, they have to be actively listening to each other, not just me. The sage on the stage, right? Like, all I have to do is just listen to this guy. No. And the other thing it does is it allows those natural things, like you had given an example. Someone says what they're doing, and someone else who's not quite sure says, you know what, I'll come with you.
Good idea.
And they say it like that. And they don't say, like, it's just a natural thing. And then I try my best not to interrupt that. I just let it keep going. Now, in person, super easy to do. Sometimes I have to point, and usually I don't. If they're paying attention, I don't. It's just a natural occurring thing. And it's not even going necessarily in turn order. Like it's just, I'm just listening. And if I notice that one of the players hasn't said anything, then I'll just look at them, or I'll point and saying, like, okay, everyone else is doing something. What are you doing? Right. And so it's not necessarily in a turn order, but it naturally just starts going in one as players, without my interruption, because that 100% agree, Max.
Somebody calls for, setting up camp. Somebody else goes, good idea. I'll go, I'll start setting up my bedroll.
Perfect. I don't need to narrate that.
I'll go look for food, I'll start the fire, and then, everyone sort of just naturally starts doing you don't need to go. It's very rare at that point where you need to go, okay, what are you doing? You could do X, you could do Y. And then it's like, okay, well, you really don't need that. I feel like when you have that, then players start to expect it. They start to expect, I get a multiple choice from the GM. That's how this works. But if you just stay silent, then it's like, oh, well, either I'm doing nothing, which is not what I came to the table to do, or I have to come up with something that I'm doing, right?
Yeah, and more games, I don't have an answer to this. I don't know because in person it seems to flow very well. But online, because of technical issues, it's not as simple to do. Yeah. And I wonder if there's some way. I think maybe what it requires players online to be much more prepared to jump in with a quick description instead of a long description. Just say, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm like, just really quick without being prompted by the game master, but at the same time using just a brief, keeping, like, if I'm being more conscientious, and I'm going to try this next time I'm in an online game, if I'm being a little more conscientious about how long of the screen time I'm taking, like, I'm terrible at this because I'll get into something and then I'm having fun and I'm having some dialogue and yada, 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 and this and this. And then all of a sudden I realize I've been talking for 2 minutes. Well, that's way too long. Like, for me just to be saying where I am and what I'm doing, that's way too long. So but it's a technical barrier, and I think more and more games are going to continue to be online, especially for those of us that are looking for a particular type of game, whatever that is. And that's a really good problem to point out too, because I find, just adding to it, I don't even have a solution. I'm kind of useless here, but adding to it, sometimes a few characters will start doing something on their own, and it's really interesting. But then you accidentally a lot of times the other players also sort of turn into audience members where they're like, oh, that is cool. And they're just sitting there listening to, the half of the party back and forth at each other. And then you look down and 15 minutes have passed and you're like, oh my God, my character's just been catatonic because I've just been listening to what these guys are doing.
Yeah. And I want to also that's almost lead to the next thing I want to talk about, like Bleecker said, taking too much screen time as a player is an unfortunate side effect of being a forever GM. I think that can be true, but also, like, I would encourage GM to talk less.
Yes.
We look game online and you see like the GM doing 90% of the talking.
Yeah, that's terrible.
That's terrible. Like, I often say, like, if you're the GM, you don't want to do more than 50% of the talking, and you should aim for much less than that.
You should aim for as little as possible, because that's going to move the onus for imagination back into where it needs to be. It needs to be with the players. And if I'm taking all of the screen time, like I like to do on these live streams, if I'm taking all of it, then there's just not a lot of room for players to be active at all.
And something I've done, because I struggle with this as well, is I tell my players, hey, I'm very often I'm playing the bad guys. Don't feel bad about interrupting me, right? I'm playing dudes that are trying to stab you or trying to shoot you, and I'm not always. Sometimes I'm playing characters that are helpful as well. But remember, you don't have to feel bad about interrupting me, right? You totally, like, if I've gone on for 5 minutes, don't feel like you have to wait for me to, finish a diatribe.
Yeah, and I should never, I should never be going, unless we're actually in dialogue back and forth, I should not be speaking uninterrupted for 5 minutes. If that's happened, something has gone awry.
Something's weird. Yeah.
And guaranteed, that's also like your players, their eyes have glassed over. They're
not absorbing
they're not taking any of it in anymore.
Yeah. That's the big problem with, like, the loredom, but also, like, and that's something oftentimes, like, people say, like, it's like the kind of bad advice, in my opinion, that we see online about, like, running the game, like, oh, make those description and make sure you engage multiple senses. Like, keep your description short. You don't have
punchy.
You're in exactly. You're in like, and you can say, like, you're in a swarm.
Yep.
People know what to expect. You don't have to describe like, oh, the ground is mushy and you
pass by,
smell is
you pass
putrid,
by a
and then you
basement.
go on and on and on. You're not like fucking reciting poetry. You're trying to describe a scene. You're setting a scene.
Yeah,
that's a good point. That's a good way of describing it. Like you're not some poet laureate here.
yeah.
This is supposed to. Yeah.
You see that when people like play module, they have like this box text and people want to read that.
Man.
That's not engaging. And when you're a player at the table, not in my opinion anyway. Like, oh, what are you gonna do? You're just like appreciating the writing of the author of the book. You know what I mean? Like that's not what we're at the table for. I can read the book on my own if that's what I want to do. And you haven't like service now, like a describe. Like you can subscribe and they give you like professionally written description. That doesn't help your game. I'm sorry. I guess I'm never gonna get sponsored by them, like Boardwalk Builder is. But I think this is like counterproductive. Keep your description short and punchy. You're not there to show how smart you are. You're not there to show how well you can write and how well you can come up with a description. You're there to set a scene.
Yep.
Say the essential. Say what's needed. Let the player contribute to it.
Well, and if you think about it percentage wise, like if let's say I have 4 players plus me, so there's 5 of us. Well, ideally I'll get 20% of the time, and all the other players will divide up the rest of the 80%. Like it should be something closer to that than me speaking for 80% of the time and they get 20%, which is what I think most games are, unfortunately.
And especially if you are just reading the box text word for word. What I would say is I'm a writer by trade, so tell me if this is wrong, but I think most people can immediately tell the difference when you are in naturally and organically narrating what's going on and reading something that's written down. Even if they don't see your face, turning to look down at something that's pre-written, they can just tell this is not in your voice. This is as in your writer's voice or your narrator's voice. This is in somebody else wrote that. You're reading it word for word. And it feels very awkward, even if it is short, but especially when it's long. I mean, I would use, they describe this palace in insane detail. Just they describe the colors of the curtains, the materials of the curtains, the materials. I would just say,
who cares?
You're it's a really expensive palace. It's a, thing.
I feel like some of them want to pad their work count, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it almost feels like that, doesn't it, Matt? Because I need to fill this whole column. The way I handle it, and I have run a few published modules. I'll just highlight the key components, and that's it.
Yeah. The building is absolutely palatial.
Yeah, like I'll make a bullet form. Like, okay, here's the key things. As long as I kind of understand it, I'll put it in my own words. But I'm not going to describe down to the texture of what the wallpaper is, and how many light bulbs are burnt out.
Yeah,
I'm not. It's unnecessary.
Does it matter?
It doesn't really matter. And so I will cut. / take it all out. Like I just don't.
You have to remember too, anything you describe, your players are going to latch on to. If this module has a box text that describes a broken mirror in the bathroom, and there's the only thing that's doing is showing you that the place is run down, your players are going to go, oh, it's a broken mirror. Is there like some spirit trapped in the mirror?
It's a rundown bathroom. Like this is a rundown, dirty bathroom, gas station bathroom. Yeah. Everyone's seen one of those.
Yeah, and they can fill in the details, and
they'll be able to fill in the details of what's plausible.
And when they fill in those details, they get to be even more active. They get to go, oh, you didn't describe the broken mirror or whatever, but I'll pick up a broken piece of glass off the floor.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. If it leave more room for them, like it doesn't matter if the mirror is broken or not. Maybe but it doesn't matter for you as a GM. Maybe it's gonna matter for a player because you got an idea, and then you can interact with it. But if you already like set that up, I hope that answers your question, J.R. Bleeker. We can talk about that. Well, I guess none of us would read the box text textually.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that's been interesting is I've been encouraging players to be more and more active, is that we'll have kind of an after session, powwow of how it went. And one of the things that we've learned about this topic is that it doesn't really matter that players don't imagine it exactly the same, because it didn't change their ability to interact with it. They may come away with it with like, well, okay, so this bathroom had 2 stalls and, you know, 1 broken urinal, whereas the other one's 2 urinals and 1 broken stall. Like,
And
it didn't really make any difference.
No,
And
and what ends up happening is that you end up having players go, wait, so how many stalls were that? Because the more you start describing, then players start going, oh, he's saying a lot of stuff, so it must be important. So like, okay, so there's 2 stalls, right? Yeah, okay, there's 2 stalls. And they start taking down a police report over, you know, this totally meaningless.
Yeah, it's just a minor detail.
Yeah.
I let the players fill in the minor details. If they feel it's important, then okay.
What Big Bad
important to them.
says, you know, well, I agree with me right now. I literally just found a secret room by fiddling with a background detail in my game 30 minutes ago, which I'm certain was just box text. Yeah, but that's something you can fill in, right? You know, if a player is, you know, you've got a bookshelf in this, you know, crazed wizards, you know, thing, and you know, a player's like, oh, I bet there's something, you know, hidden in the page, and you know, they start fiddling with some books trying to find a secret passage or something. You can go, you know, maybe
yeah, I'd roll for that.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would roll. Yeah, I would roll. I would, you know, I don't know. I'm not just going to give that to you because it's kind of obvious, kind of a tropey thing to think of, but you know, maybe.
Yeah. I think we should be about to wrap up now. We've been like over time.
Yeah.
Like,
sorry, Max. It's
I
getting late
usually
for
try
you.
to go. No, well, no, it's not that. But I usually try to aim for an hour 30. We sometimes go 2 hours. Now we pass 2 hours. But I want to make sure though before we wrap up, because I don't want to rush things either. You know, like it's a good topic, and we still have. If you still have stuff to say, if there's something you want to add that we didn't cover,
I do have one thing.
Cover a pretty. Yeah, go ahead. By all means.
Well, let's suppose that we have had some success. Players are being more active at the table. They're engaged, enthusiastic. How do we keep them coming back? And I think this is an important thing. There's a couple of things I've been toying with when you gave me the topic of what we're going to be talking about here tonight. One of them is just, I think it's really important when hosting a game, and I play more frequently in person, to be a good host. So I like, you know, I like the table to be ready, the drinks to be cold. I like to have the music in the background. For my group, that works. I know, Max, for you that wouldn't work, and that would be fine. But like, I like to have that. So when they arrive, I'm ready. I'm sitting there. I'm ready to go. And I think that if we want active players, then sending the message that, look, this is, as much as you put into the game is what you're going to get out, but I want you to see how much I'm prepared to make this work. And then not so much just giving them all back rubs at the end of the session, but highlighting when they, you know, them being active and how cool it was, or how after the session's over. I used to do this in real time, but I recognize now that kind of cheerleading is actually breaks immersion. But afterwards, I think it's great to talk to them and say, you know, I totally didn't expect you to do that, and that was great. And I liked how you did this, and I saw you coming out of your shell here, and I think that was fantastic. And the dialogue that you had with that NPC was really on point.
I really like what you added there.
I like what you added there,
like to see more of.
And I'd love to see what happens with this. And you have that kind of. I think it's important that players, if the dice will be what the dice will be, and sometimes you'll just have a bad night. And we have all had that. Like I was trying to be active, but every time I rolled the stupid dice, it just didn't work. Yeah. And it, you know, some mechanics are a little more random than others. Like Weird Frontiers, I'm looking at you. So there is going to be times where it's just going to be a kind of a bad night. But it gives, I think, spending that 20 minutes at the end of the game or 30 minutes at the end of the game, just saying, yeah, you know, I know that it didn't work and you had all these failures when you were trying to do this, but it was awesome that you decided this and that I like that, because I think it's really important if we're going to spend some time thinking about having to get players more active in the game. I want them to leave the game excited for the next one. And it's not just a matter of a constant cliffhanger. It's also that, hey, wasn't it great that you were doing this? And, you know, I game with adults. They don't need me. They're not looking for some kind of, what is that guy, Stuart Smalley or whatever, you know, dang it, I am somebody, and people, gosh darn it, people like me. It's not that. These are adults. They're, for the most part, well-rounded. I mean, with one obvious exception. But these, I was thinking of me, but I think
You want
that
to play one game together, man.
Yeah, that's right, and you can tell already, right? So, but I think that it's important those two components. If you want to have players come back in an in-person game, again, online, I'm still new at, so I don't have much to say about that. But I do feel strongly to be a good host. Make sure it's ready. Make sure I'm ready. Make sure that there's toilet paper in the bathroom, and if I've got treats out or whatever it is, it's ready to go. And it's not a filthy pigsty. Things are in order so they can, I think that's really important. And then having that time afterwards to encourage the kind of things that we saw as players come out of their shells and try to be more active.
Yeah,
I online play take care of a lot of those issues.
Yeah, that's right.
But
be willing to talk with your players, like set aside a little bit of time after the session to go, all right, let's the debriefing or whatever of like, all right, what did we like about that? Get some out of character input from your players too. It's a two-way medium. So getting your players go, oh yeah, I thought this was really cool. This I didn't like. It kind of felt like I only had one correct choice here. I want to hear from that. I want to hear what I can change as a DM to get people more active.
Oh yeah, like it's not just a time to blow sunshine up everyone's behind. Like and I'll be quite frank with players. I'll say, well, I didn't like how this went, or I felt like I could have done this better.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do now. This is a bit of a departure from me. I didn't used to do this, but I'm much more willing now to have players kind of peek behind the screen. And the only reason I'm willing to do that afterwards, say, well, I thought you were going to do this, and I had this planned, is because I've already started on the premise that every game session that we have, I've created new secrets for them to discover, and I'm not reusing them. So like we'll talk about, I kind of thought it was going to go this way, and I thought that there may have been a secret here but if I say that and we talk about how it went and how I liked how they went, inevitably I like their choices more than my own. They know that whatever it is next session, it's going to be something new. And so
I think that's probably a good way also to diffuse the temptation of reusing what
you just tell them right up.
Exactly. Like and then like you say, like it's almost like not wasted, because like even though it's not, you didn't see them in play, you can show them after the game and say, what, oh look, that's what I thought.
This is what I had thought.
And then you went somewhere else. And then you can still have this cool moment, like, oh, that would have been cool, but we went somewhere else. That's fine.
But we're gonna go somewhere else next time. And it's fun to do. And it keeps me honest in the sense that I'm always coming up with something new. I'm not just, okay, well, I've planned this, our next 6 months of gaming. I've already done that. It's in my notebook. I'm just not interested in that anymore. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say, is that I think it's really important to think about how to keep your players coming back. And
I think that's definitely something like this, I guess positive reinforcement, you would call it, like at the end of the campaign. That's definitely something I could be better at. You can imagine.
You're more of a, hey, just man up. Like what's your issue? That's
I'm gonna hit you with
some
a
of that
stick.
is good too, man. Some of that's required too. Like, come on, put your big boy pants on. Let's get to work. Let's go.
Yeah.
What about you, Tyler? Something you think we should have covered that we didn't?
I think we could have. Well, not could have, because the stream would be 18 hours long. But
I'm not there.
Yeah.
That's amazing. There's
thinking about other mechanics, not just the core mechanic and not just the player GM interface with the mechanics, but sort of the fringe mechanics of how to get players more interacting with the world proactively. For example, Shadowrun has the contacts mechanic, which is where, hey, you, depending on your charisma or your, I don't remember what the stat is called, but you come to the table with 2 NPCs that your character knows.
Yeah, Burning Wheel is
be a full backstory, but it's like, okay, if you're stuck at some point, if you feel like you haven't done anything, you can go, hey, I'm going to go call up my friend, and you give them a profession, you give them a name. That's pretty much it. It's like that. I found is a great way. I call up my old college friend, and then it's immediately we're back into the action.
I add that to every game. Like every player will start with a friend and a foe.
Yeah, I think it's a phenomenal thing.
Everyone.
Yeah. Who do you know? It's a very simple thing.
There's some game that added, like in the mechanics, like you said, Shadowrun, Burning Wheel, like you have those circle.
Yep.
And you create NPC that the GM can use afterward. Yeah. I think we could have talked about that. those exist.
And having and also having a
you can steal them for your game.
and having a thing, with your with character knowledge, character knowledge that the players might not have. I like having things, if the setting isn't super well defined, if you've succeeded on a knowledge check, tell me what that looks like. You get to make that up, and I'll write it down. I'll write it down in my notes. So whatever you've said here is true forever. I trust my players enough not to be making up, like crazy, absurd stuff.
And the big thing is like if the setting is not well defined,
exactly.
That's why I say don't keep your setting vague and define it truly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a discovery process.
Yeah. I think we're gonna wrap things up now.
Sorry guys, I talk way too much.
I think it was a very interesting conversation. I hope this is going to be helpful to some people, and also you know what, this conversation was a lot like a frame toward like a GM. We framed the conversation how to have active player and stuff like that, but it's also like something that a player can listen to and like how to be an active player, because we often talk about we often talk to GM about like how to improve your game and stuff like that. But I think there's some onus on the player as well. Like there's some.
Absolutely.
You want to be a good player as well. So people that are not running a game, and even if you're running a game, sometimes you're a player as well. You have to remember that as well. For a player, it's also like they are to interject in the game. I still have to work on that on game with Castle and Crusade. I've been a GM for so long. Now, like I don't want to step on anybody's toe, especially since I got a big personality, so I try to restrain myself a bit.
Well, it seems like those of us that run games, they were all kind of that type A personalities.
You've got a fan, Crispy.
Well, thank you, Bleecker, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you very much. All excellent comments, and I thought that was very helpful.
I hope Bleecker was being an active commenter. He's the kind of player.
I hope we'll be able to. I hope we will be able to have Crispy more often. Like I always really like talking with Crispy.
Oh, it's a big honor. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's very, very kind of you to invite me on, and I hope to do it again. Guys, hopefully we can keep it to an hour and a half.
If you subscribe to Crispy and the channel Table Winner, like you absolutely need to. It doesn't upload content as often as it should.
No, I don't. I've been a little lax on that. I've just been so busy at work, but yeah, I do hope to get more content out there. And basically my content is just my own experiences. So you can take it or leave it, but I'm trying to be authentic and talk about things that I'm actually doing, and instead of just a lot of theory crafting, which I think there's no shortage of channels that'll do that. And that works for them, but I'd prefer to be, here's what I'm trying. I'm experimenting with this. Here's how it went. Successes, failures. So.
Yeah, no, but I think you actually add something to the conversation. So I really thank you for joining me, and Tyler.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for joining us, joining me as always.
As always.
Yeah.
And thank you for everybody that joined us live, and thank you to everybody that watched on the replay. And we'll be back next week for another Dice in Design, but we didn't decide a topic yet.
We didn't.
And we'll talk about that offline. Sometimes we talk about it, but now the show has been long, and we're stepping on the guy from Black Lodge Game.
Oh, dang it! Yes, I like their streams too. I got to get on that.
I'll move on after that. So I'll see you in chat there and on the Black Lodge Game guy.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm ending the stream now. Again, thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, everybody that watched. And hopefully see you next week. I might stream on Sunday also at some point. So see you soon, man. Bye.
Okay.
See ya.